In this screencast, we're going to consider the external environment. So thinking back to the first screencast, when we talked about the first strategic question, which is where are we now, in order to understand our strategic position. This is the first step, the first stage in the strategic process. So just to remind ourselves of what we looked at in the first lecture, we saw that in determining the strategic position, that the first thing we would look at is external analysis. Okay, and the key tool or framework, as it's better called, that we're going to look at today is PEST or PESTEL. And this is a tool or a framework which allows us to analyse the external environment and ultimately to identify the most important, the most significant opportunities and threats that face an organisation. So let's start off with, first of all, thinking about why and how organisations analyse the external environment. So the why. So what do? Well, they scan the strategic horizon. The horizon, if you are looking, is the furthest point that you can see. And why do you look at the horizon? You look at the horizon because you want to see in good time and have plenty of warning any trends or developments which are coming up, which may have an impact on your business. So organisations look across the strategic horizon to try to identify issues and trends which are going to have an impact on their business. Either a positive impact, maybe, or a negative impact, maybe. Okay, so the first thing is they are aware of them, and they are aware of them in good time, because strategy is about having a longer term vision, 5 years, 10 years into the future. So we want to be aware of things on the horizon that may be travelling towards us, issues that may be becoming more important, so that we can prepare our plans for the next 5 to 10 years. So strategy is future oriented. It looks at what is going to happen in the future. External analysis is future oriented. It looks at issues that may come up in the future. Okay, so first of all, strategic horizon scanning allows organisations to identify trends. The next thing that external analysis requires is it requires us to evaluate those trends and to decide how serious they are for the organisation and whether they represent opportunities or whether they represent threats. Okay, now once we've done that, we're then in a position to start to develop strategies, that's to say plans, to help maximise opportunities and to minimise threats. Okay, so that is the purpose. First of all, identify them and identify them early. Secondly, categorise them as opportunities and threats, having done some detailed analysis, and then start to think about plans or strategies to maximise opportunities, take advantage of them, to minimise threats or to neutralise threats. So, how do organisations analyse the external environment? Well, a key tool is PEST or PESTEL analysis. So P stands for politics, E stands for economics, S stands for social, cultural, T stands for technology. Now with PESTEL, it's just the same, but the E stands for environmental, so green concerns, climate change, things like that, and L stands for legal, so anything to do with copyright, import, export, those kinds of things. Okay, so PESTEL is the key framework. Now, let's just think about the business environment for organisations. Here we've got a diagram which shows the organisation at the centre of two layers. Here's one layer, defined by industry, competitors, suppliers and customers. Now, we're going to look at these in the live lecture, which is happening on Thursday. Okay, but today what we're looking at is the macro environment, and that is the macro environment defined by these PEST factors: political, economic, social, technological. Okay, now what this doesn't have is it doesn't have the environmental and the legal. I'm not too concerned really whether you include environmental and legal in your PESTEL analysis. Just considering these factors is important enough for me. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is this macro environment which exerts an influence on the organisation, and then on Thursday we're going to look at these industry environment factors which have an impact on what the organisation can do. So, what's some of the characteristics or features of the external environment? Well, first of all, managers have got no control over most of what happens in the external environment. Now, if we think about the internal environment, then managers do have controls over how much they spend, the facilities they operate, the people they recruit, but political, economic, social and technological factors are largely beyond the control of the managers. So what do they need to do? If they can't control, they've got to anticipate and react to changes in the environment. And clearly they can react better and have better plans if they analyse the environment and identify soon and early factors which are going to become important and will have an impact on their business, right? And that allows them to produce strategic plans. Now, if we don't effectively scan and analyse the environment, the danger is that we miss some key important developments, which might be opportunities, so we might miss a great opportunity, or we might ignore a threat until it's too late. So, this cartoon is called the boiling frog. Now, a frog, scientific research has shown, is a creature, an animal, that is not aware of slowly increasing heat in its environment. So, if you put frogs in water and very, very slowly increase the temperature, so their environment is changing slowly, their bodies don't recognise this increase in temperature until it's too late and they are boiled. The heat of the water kills them and cooks them. Now, we can draw a comparison between the boiling frog and businesses that aren't attuned to their environment, that don't scan the horizon, are in danger of finding themselves in a hostile, dangerous environment which is detrimental and which has a negative effect on their chances of success. And remember, strategy is about understanding why some organisations succeed and some organisations fail. Well, some organisations fail because they're in a hostile environment and they haven't been able to predict and foresee this hostile environment, and they haven't been able to put plans in place to try and increase their chances of survival and success in that environment. So the boiling frog is a useful example of why it is important to be aware of your environment. So, what is the nature of the environment? Well, environments can be different. So some business environments can be characterised by the 3 S's. And here we have the 3 S's, right? And the three S's mean that the environment is safe, right? There aren't that many threats. There are more opportunities than threats. It is simple. There aren't lots of factors which affect the environment. There are only one or two factors, a small number of factors which have an impact on the organisation, and the environment is static. That means trends don't come and go and don't change very quickly. Issues don't come quickly, and they change in predictable ways. So safe, simple, static leads to what's called a benign environment. And benign is another word for kind or not dangerous. Okay, so some organisations operate in environments which are characterised by the 3Ds. They are dangerous, right? So there are far more threats in their environment than there are opportunities. They are diverse, so there's a wide range of factors which are difficult to track and predict that can affect these organisations, and their dynamic. Change happens and trends happen and change in this environment in ways which are difficult to track and predict, and all these things add up to a hostile environment. So hostile, if you don't know the word of the meaning, means not friendly, unfriendly. So benign means friendly, kind. Hostile means unfriendly and unkind. Now, I'm just going to play you this video for a few minutes to show you something about the modern world. Okay, so I'm just stopping that video there. It is on YouTube, and if you type in "the world is changing," you will find it and watch more. But what this video shows us is, it's a bit old now. It was from 2011, but it does show us that the world is changing at a rapid rate. And it's not just individuals, people like you and me, who've got to work out what this means. It's governments, it's businesses, and it's sport organisations. We're all affected by this environment, and it's going to throw up opportunities and threats for us. And you as managers, you're young people, you are going to still be working when it comes round to 2050, 2060. You need to understand that the world is going to change, and there's going to be different kind of business opportunities, and some of the current businesses that exist won't be able to continue in their format. So that's why we look, and the world is becoming driven by technology and computers and the pace of change, the global economy, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, globalization, urbanization. These things are really changing human society, economies, governments, creating legal and environmental issues. So all these pestle factors which organisations have got to learn to cope with and have solutions to deal with if they're going to be successful. So if we think about leisure and sport, what we can see is that if we look over the long term, the demand for leisure and sport increases gradually over time. But within this overall increase, we see a lot of volatility. Volatility means instability. Yeah, it means that things change very quickly. So within the leisure and sports sector, there can be areas of rapid expansion and rapid decline. So when I was young, when I was about 12 or 13, skateboarding in England was a big sport. By the time I was in my 20s and 30s, it wasn't so big, but now it's becoming bigger again, and it was due to be in the Tokyo Olympics as a sport for the first time in the 2020 Olympic Games before it was postponed. Hopefully it will be next year if the Olympics can happen in 2021 in Tokyo. But one of the things about the leisure and the sport market is it is subject to change and trends. So certain gym classes are very popular now, but they will become less popular in a few years. So when I was younger, it was boxercise and things like that. Now it's kind of hit cyclocross and things like that, which are far more popular, and other things have changed. So activities can change. One of the big things that's happening in Western countries is team sports like football, rugby, cricket. They are becoming less popular as participation sports that people play, and what is replacing them are things like going to the gym, running, jogging, climbing, walking, sports that you do by yourself, solo sports, informal sports. So team sports declining, solo sports, informal sports increasing. And that is because the world of work is changing, social structures are changing. So we have a 24/7 economy where people are working different shift patterns all the time. And that makes it difficult to commit and be a member of a team which always trains at a certain time and which always plays its games, its matches at a certain time on a certain day. If you're at work, because your shift pattern changes, you can't do that. So you might take up a solo sport, which you can do by yourself when you are free around your shift pattern. So things are changing, and that does affect the demand for sport. So some factors in the environment are really volatile and unpredictable. So this time last year, not many people would have talked about COVID-19 and would have said that it would have affected the sport industry. How has it affected it? The Olympic Games were cancelled. Major sport events were cancelled. The Premier League fixtures in England were postponed. The NBA season in America was postponed and is being played now in Disneyland in Orlando in a bubble without spectators. So this has changed sport fundamentally. But has it affected all organisations or all sports in the same way? Some sports may actually be winners. So I was reading a report getting ready for this study school which said that esports are very popular in Hong Kong. Where do you play esport? Where you play it remotely across a computer network with other people who you don't necessarily see. So esports potentially could be booming. So COVID-19 could be an opportunity for esports, but for the Premier League, for the Olympics, it's a massive threat. Will we even have the Olympics next year? We don't know. So it affects different organisations and different sports in different ways. So esports, success. Spectator sports, a big problem. Participation sports, playing with a team because of social distancing is a problem. But running by yourself in the outdoors is not a problem. So you need to understand that different factors will affect different organisations in different ways. So now we're going to take more of a detailed look at pest or pestel, which I've characterised on this slide as a tool for collecting information and making sense of the external environment. So those are two separate things. First of all, it's a framework, a table in which you put information. But then there's a second process, which is making sense of. And the making sense is thinking about, is this factor important? And what impact could this have on the business for my organisation? So there are two separate phases. So it's not just enough to collect the information. You've got to collect the information and then process it to decide what's the impact and which are the most important. Because organisations can't address every single factor in the environment. They've got to prioritise their attention, their resources on a manageable number of factors that they can address. So here are the pestel categories. So what we can see is we've got political, economic, social, cultural, technological, environmental, and legal. Okay, and under each of these you have a list of some of the factors which could be considered. So if we were looking under political in Hong Kong, we might be looking at policy of the Leisure and Cultural Services Department, its funding for sport, how much it's investing in sport, politically what it is doing about social distancing around coronavirus and public health policy and the impact that that is having on the sport industry in Hong Kong. Economically, if we look under economic, we might be looking at what's the economic forecasts for Hong Kong. What does that mean for disposable income? And disposable income is the amount of money which people have to spend on goods and services. So if the economy is doing well, or is forecast to do well, then it is likely that consumers will have more money to spend on goods such as sport. So that would be positive, that would be an opportunity. If because of COVID-19, the economy is forecast to shrink or decline or not grow. That might have an impact on disposable income and the amount of money people have got to spend, which would be a threat. So if the economic outlook is bad, people are less likely to spend money on sports goods. So that is going to be a threat. Okay, so social and cultural. This can be things like population growth rate and age distribution. So throughout a lot of the Western world, so Europe certainly, and Hong Kong is the same, we have an ageing population. So the age structure in Hong Kong means that there are going to be more older people and fewer younger people. So older people's participation in sport, tastes in sport, is going to be quite different than young people. So what might that mean? But here as well, we've got kind of, lifestyle attitudes, health consciousness. So if there's an increased awareness of the role of physical activity in sport in improving health, that's an opportunity. If people are wanting to live healthier, more green lifestyles, that could be positive as well for sports like cycling or walking. So instead of people taking transit, taking the MTR, they could walk, they could cycle. It could mean, opportunities for the parks in Hong Kong to do more kinds of activities. Technology. So we've got kind of, technological change. Well, technological change is changing the way that companies or businesses like Nike or Adidas produce their goods. So the traditional thinking is that Nike is an American company, but it doesn't really make any of its products in America. It makes them in lower wage economies to reduce its costs. But then they've also incurred costs in having to move their products from places like Taiwan, China, Vietnam, Malaysia to some of their major markets in Europe and the US. So they've got high transport costs. So 3D printing, they are investing heavily in 3D printing because they think that means that they can produce goods nearer to home. They're reducing labour costs and they can ship their goods, their manufactured goods, into shops in the US and Europe and other places in the world much more quickly. So technology is changing. Obviously, the internet and connectivity and online shopping has grown massively during COVID-19 while shops have been closed. And so that's changing the shape of things. Esports is being driven by, a connected society, technological development. So that is having a big impact. Environmental and legal. I'm not going to say too much about those at the minute. There are factors, but I'm going to leave those because I think it's pest, these four categories, that are really the most significant and the most important. So, what are we doing through pest? We've already said the first thing is we identify the factors and then we kind of think which are the most important at the present time, but looking into the future, what do we think are going to be important in the next few years? So pest helps us identify those external opportunities and threats. And remember, opportunities and threats are derived from the external environment. Yeah? So they come from outside the business, not inside the business. If you write in your assignment that a lack of money is a threat, then that wouldn't really be correct. A lack of money is a weakness because it's a lack of resources. So internal factors are strengths and weaknesses. External factors are opportunities and threats. Now, one of the issues with pest is that there is a huge amount of information. Pest asks us as managers, as business people, to look at everything. Look at everything in the political, economic, social, technological, environmental and legal spheres. Right? So that is a huge amount of information and data. And the problem can be that you can end up like this woman here. Too much information to process. Your brain, your mind can't handle it. Okay, so what to do about this? Well, there are reports available from sources like Passport GMID, and GMID stands for Global Marketing Information Database. Okay, so this provides you with information on markets and trends in different industries in different geographic locations, right? So if you've got so much information, first of all, you won't be able to do something about every single pest factor. So what you need to do is identify the factor and analyse and prioritise. And by analyse, I mean work out what the impact is going to be and how serious it could be for your organisation, okay, or how important it could be for your organisation. So the aim in businesses and of environmental analysis is to prioritise down your long list of factors in your pest matrix to a short list of the most important factors. Okay, so how can we do this? Well, here's one possible way of thinking about this. So, say you've identified something and you think that that this factor is going to be a threat for your organisation. You can then set up a matrix like this, right? And up this axis here, we're saying seriousness of impact, right? Seriousness of impact, yeah? So if it's got low here, we're saying, well, this will probably have a low level of impact on the organisation, yeah? If we look here, we're saying this is a high level of impact on the organisation. And then over here, we've got probability of occurrence. How likely is this threat to actually happen in the future? And if you think it's high or you think it's low, you can put them into these boxes. So here we've got some kind of traffic light system, right? So if you've got something which is a high probability of occurrence and it's a high seriousness of impact, that is something that you need to think about, and that's a major threat, and it needs to be a priority for your strategy. Yeah. So any organisation which says this is a major threat because there's a high seriousness of impact level and there's a high probability of occurrence level, but then it doesn't do anything about this in its strategy, that's not a good strategy. Yeah. So anything that you think is likely to happen, high probability of occurrence, and is likely to have a high level of serious impact as a threat, you need to do something about it. The category down in the right hand side, I've given that a green traffic light, because that means, well, if it's got a low level of impact and a low likelihood of occurrence, don't prioritise this. This should not go on your short list of issues. You don't need to worry about it. And then we've got these two squares here. We've got the one down in the bottom left hand corner, and this is kind of low serious of impact but high probability of occurrence. So you're monitoring this, you are watching it, keeping an eye on it, yeah, for increases in seriousness. Up here with low probability of occurrence, so we don't think it will happen, but if it does happen, the impact could be high, then that's monitor for increases in probability. So coronavirus, COVID-19, is a really good example here. So for years before 2020, there was SARS in 2003, but it wasn't the same. Then most governments, if they were preparing plans, would say, okay, well, if there is a pandemic, the impact is going to be serious. Now, I think COVID-19 has been more serious than any of us would have thought of. But the likelihood overall is relatively low. We have not had a global pandemic like this in hundreds of years. Yeah? But we still need to monitor for increases in probability so that we can take action. But really, for your short list of major issues, you should be thinking about this square here. So anything that you think is a threat and has got a high level of impact and a high probability of occurrence should go onto your short list of issues to be addressed through your strategy. Now, the other category of factor which will come through your pest analysis is an opportunity. So opportunities can be put into a similar kind of matrix. So here we've got beneficial impact. So is it likely to have a good impact, or the benefit of the impact on the organisation? Is it going to be high or is it going to be low? And over here we've got success probability. Can your organisation convert this factor into a success because it's got the right skills and the right resources, or do you think there's a low chance of it being able to convert this into a success? So anything that's got a high beneficial impact and there's a high success probability, which means your organisation can take advantage of this opportunity, that is one of your best opportunities. Anything which is low success probability and low beneficial impact is too minor to consider. These two other categories you're monitoring. You're not discounting them, but you're monitoring them. But for your pest analysis, what you really be doing is your short list of opportunities will be made up of your best opportunities. So I hope that helps you understand how you can prioritise some of the long lists. So that is a tool. The opportunity matrix and the threat matrix are both tools that you can use to analyse and prioritise some of your pestel factors. Okay, now I'm not going to talk to you about this, but if you look in your Adobe Pages workbook, you will see that I've put a link to this pestel template. So this is just the first page of your pestel template, and what you'll see is a number of columns. Column 1 is where you would write in details of your factor, right? So you would talk about, for example, Hong Kong health policy is saying that social distancing will occur, and this will limit certain sports, right? Yeah? Okay, so you will put here, this is what's going on, this is your reference. What would the implications of lockdown be for a sport or a business in Hong Kong? And then over in column 4, do you think this is high, medium or low impact? So under political, you might be able to think of 3 or 4 factors which you can put into here. Okay, so for each factor of pestel, this is political, you might think of, 3 or 4 political, 3 or 4 economic, 3 or 4 social, cultural, 3 or 4 technology, and then maybe 3 or 4 environmental and legal factors. But then using the threat matrix and the opportunity matrix, decide which are the most important, okay? Because really what we want you to do is to write about a small number. So if you look in your workbook, you will see that there is a button for you to click which will take you straight through to the pestel template. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do for some homework this week is to begin to look at the pestel template and begin to look at some of the sources of information. So the information that's available through the Passport Global Marketing Intelligence Database, which is the subject of the next short screencast, screencast number 4. So I'd like you to look at that. So the first thing to do is open the pestel template and make sure you understand it. Read the instructions on the template. This link will take you straight through to the Blackboard site where you will see the example. Also in Blackboard, I've put some examples of work that previous students who've done the course in years before you, the way that they've completed the template. So there are some examples, and in your workbooks there are links through to that. So the homework this week, which I will ask you to bring to the classes next week, to the live lecture next week, will be to try to complete the pastel template. Okay, so some conclusions on this. So the first thing we've seen is that the external environment for sport organisations is complex, it's difficult, it's dynamic, and that factors affect different sport organisations in different ways. Okay, so we used COVID-19 as an example of how that had, in some ways, a beneficial impact on demand and consumer interest in esports, but for spectator sports, it had had an impact on the revenue and the attendance and the visitors that they would be able to have at their events. And for many events, they were actually cancelled entirely this year. Secondly, we've looked at the pastel framework, and I introduced you to the pastel framework. I've shown you a template that you can use for beginning to collect your information, right? What we talked about is the need for good quality data and information from reliable sources. The screencast, which you can look at after this lecture, is about Passport Global Marketing Intelligence Database. So there is information in there which is helpful, and I've also downloaded to the Blackboard site some Hong Kong reports, so some things that are relevant to pest analysis and to the sport industry. So your workbook gives you information on how to actually access that with links and hyperlinks through to the reports. The fourth thing we talked about was that the amount of data can be a lot to deal with. It can make your head hurt because there is so much information, and you might feel like, I don't know what to do with this information. But this leads on to the next point. A graduate skill is to be able to process lots of information and decide which is important. So in doing strategic management and in dealing with this high volume of information, you are developing new skills. So businesses and students such as yourself can't react to every external factor. I'm going to ask you to write a 3,000 word assignment for this module. In 3,000 words, you would not be able to write enough about all the possible external factors. So what we're asking you to do is write about 3 or 4 external factors in the external analysis section. And organisations wouldn't be able to do something about every possible external factor. They would focus on a small number of factors that they felt were critical for them. So using the prioritisation matrix or using some other way, you need to decide which are the most important. And this information can be put into your pastel template. Your pastel template is your homework for this week. So we expect you to spend 1 or 2 hours working on the pastel template before you come to next week's session. And in next week's live lecture, we will be talking about opportunities and threats that have come from your pastel analysis. So that is the end of this session, and I will see you next in the live lecture tomorrow. Thank you.